Hello and welcome to the White Collar Fitness Radio, the ultimate podcast for professionals striving to achieve optimal performance in today's fast-paced age. I'm your host, Bruno Dalladoni, online body transformation specialist and founder of the Health Coach Fitness. I'm here to help you optimize your health and fitness, even if you're short on time.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode where we're discussing how to structure your workout session. You've gone to the gym, you don't have a plan yet, and you fancy just winging it, seeing how you go, but you still want to make sure that you get something out of it, and you want to have some degree of structure to how you wing it, I suppose. There are a few considerations that you probably need to have, and the first one would be obviously what you're trying to do. Is it a bit of a whole body session? Are you doing more specific body parts, chest and shoulders, chest and back? Are you doing a leg session? Once you have that clear in your mind, then the next thing for you to think about is exercise selection. Now, I'm going to go counter Instagram and all the various social medias, TikTok, and tell you that you probably don't need to be doing the most complicated exercise you have ever conceptualized in your life, because it's probably fairly pointless. What do I mean by that? And as a random example, what you tend to find is that it doesn't take very long of scrolling either through Instagram or TikTok to see some girl with a massive booty doing some video about exercise you need to do to grow your glutes, and inevitably in there they'll have some variation of a single leg RDL. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most people can't do a single leg RDL. Now, that's not because of anything fancy, other than they haven't built up the skill to do that. Now, there's obviously plenty of people that can do that, but your average person that's looking at a video on TikTok for inspiration for their workouts, like I say, I would hazard a guess that they probably can't. And that's something that, for me, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine where it comes to the fitness industry anyway, because we set these unrealistic expectations of what people can and can't, should and shouldn't be able to do when they go to the gym. And like anything, there is, in fact, a skill progression. If all things being equal, if you are 14 years old and you barely play basketball, you're not going to play in the NBA. There's a reason for that. Like I say, all things being equal, you just don't have the skill. As a 26-year-old that's been playing their whole life, this applies where it comes to going to the gym as well, even though for some reason people don't think about it. And the first thing for you to think about where it comes to selecting the right exercise for you based on your skill level is stability. Can you stabilize everything else? Can you stabilize the right parts that you need to stabilize to be able to perform the exercise? For example, if you're doing a chest press of any kind, bench press with a bar, dumbbells, or you're doing a chest press on a fixed machine, on a Smith machine, honestly, it doesn't matter. You're doing some form of chest press. Can you stabilize your shoulders? Can you stabilize your core? Can you push without your shoulders going all over the place? And if the answer is yes, then you may want to either consider sitting with that exercise and progressing, or if you've progressed enough and you've started to plateau a bit, perhaps changing to a slightly more skill demanding exercise. So going from a fixed machine with a fixed path aka you have handles that move in one way and that's it. Maybe going to a barbell or some dumbbells, increasing the stability demand, increasing the skill demand, and moving the exercise on. Perhaps that is something to consider. So stability, really important, and something that gets massively overlooked. It doesn't take particularly long in any gym that you go to see people throwing weights around with very little care for how they're stabilizing the movement. Now, why do I keep banging on about this? And the reason is for you to be able to get to the next bit that I'm going to talk about, which is being able to consciously contract the muscle, you need to be able to stabilize, because otherwise you're just moving the weight from A to B and consciously thinking about what you're doing. Next is just that. It's consciously contracting the target muscle. Now, there is a bit of play in the joints here, because if you're doing a power move, for example, say you're doing a clean or a jerk, you don't have the time to think about that per se, because it's an explosive power movement. You're literally just driving. Like I say, this here is something with a bit of play at the joints, but I would again hazard a guess that one, most people listening to the podcast, and two, most people that go to the gym anyway, just on their lunch break or before they go to work, probably aren't doing snatches just for the sakes of it. If you're trying to lift some weights and you're just trying to do your thing, then yeah, being able to slow down, stabilize, feel the contraction is important. Now, you might not exactly feel where you need to feel, but so long as you're moving in a really stable way and you can consciously go through that movement and potentially consciously feel the contraction, maybe, then you're getting somewhere. Then you are actually doing what you want to do as opposed to throwing the weight around. And then the next bit is something that I think as an industry we also really lack, which is helping people understand what exercises do what. Because unless you've been working out for a while, you might understand progressions and regressions of exercises. But by and large, from having spent the best part of 10 years in the industry, I can tell you most people don't have a clue why they do the stuff they do. And that's terrible, really, as an industry, considering the number of people that work out. I think that's a real shortcoming from the industry, of the industry. And making sure that you understand an exercise that you're doing is meant to do, so that if for whatever reason you go there, the gym's busy, you can't get on what you're trying to get, then in your head you've already worked out alternatives that you can still work the same muscle, you can still do the same thing, but in a different way. Having that understanding is really important, and having a few almost pre-prepared options in your mind about, okay, if the pec deck machine is busy, the chest fly machine is busy, then maybe I can try to use some cables, or I could, definitely would not recommend, but I could use some dumbbells. Don't use dumbbells. Please don't ever use dumbbells. Now I say that again, and hopefully you guys get my weird sense of humor by now. Of course, you can use dumbbells. They're just very difficult to stabilize. So that's just where I'm going with that. But having an understanding of a few different exercises that'll target the same or similar muscles in the same or similar ways will just allow you to obviously be able to literally wing it. That's what we said at the start of the podcast. If you were going to the gym and you just want to do a thing, if you have a few options, you can definitely do a thing without getting too stressed. Next thing for you to consider is exercise order. What exercise you want to do, your exercise selection is sorted. The next is, okay, what order should you do it in? And this is Again, there's a little bit of play at the joints here. This is a little bit goal dependent. However, having said that, it's not massively goal dependent. And what I mean by that is like this. If you're trying to grow some muscle, if you're trying to grow some tissue, then perhaps doing an isolation exercise or an accessory exercise before your main lifts or your big compounds could be beneficial. You pre-exhaust the tissue, it just gets extra work in. Fine. Again, it doesn't take particularly long through scrolling on Instagram or TikTok, especially around male bodybuilding accounts, for you to find someone talking about starting your leg workouts with calf raises. So you pre-exhaust your calves, and then as you go throughout the rest of your workout, because they're already tired, they're just getting a bit more stimulus, which leads to potentially better growth. That sort of thing. It can work. Now, would I recommend it for the day-to-day person? Probably not. But then again, goal dependent. Now and again, it could work. But say, for example, you are in fact wanting to get a bit more into CrossFit or get a bit more into, I don't know, something a bit more power-based, a little bit more strength-based, then absolutely start with your big, heavy compounds and then move on to the smaller stuff. Bit of a rule of thumb where it comes to exercise order is the bigger the movement, the heavier you can go with a given movement, the more taxing it is. Not just on your muscles, but also on your central nervous system. If you have done a very heavy, very hard session today, just be aware that you might be very fatigued and brain foggy and just not altogether with it the following day. That does happen. So understanding what you're trying to achieve out of that random workout you're doing is important. And then, as a rule of thumb, start with your big compounds. So when I say main lifts, I don't necessarily mean squats, deadlifts, and bench press. The main lift you're doing for that session. So say, for example, it's a push session. It could be dips. It could be dumbbell chest press. You have a main lift that you're doing. You might want to throw in a second compound. So, for example, you might choose to have your main lift as your dips and then a second compound as some dumbbell chest press. Obviously, adjust the rep range for those to make sure that they match what you're trying to do. But have your big compounds at the start and then smaller stuff. So you've done your dips as your main lift, secondary compound for your chest press, and then you're just finishing off with some lateral raises for your shoulders, some tricep extensions for your triceps, and maybe, if you really fancy, a bit of extra volume on your chest before you do your lateral raises. You could do, like I say, the chest fly machine. Bosh. Nothing wild, nothing crazy. Compound, isolation. Really simple. That's just a fairly straightforward push session. There's no pulling involved, no biceps, no anything else. Just upper body push. Just like that. Now, I'm not saying you should go off and do that. I'm just picking exercises out of the depths of my brain, and by Jove, yeah, I had to ramage for those. Anyway, so exercise order, exercise selection, exercise order. Next for you to consider is volume. So how much are you actually working? Traditionally, we'd work out your volume as the number of sets times by the number of reps times by your the weight, or the total number of reps. No. You've done 3 sets of 12 reps. That's 36 reps times the weight you used for those reps. Okay, a lot of random information you probably don't need to know, but we're here now. Now, volume is very dependent on many things. How fatigued you are, where along your training cycle you are, and what I mean by that is like in the week, where along the mesocycle you are, in fact, which would be, say, for example, you are in fact following a plan. How far along the plan are you? Have you been doing the plan for a week? Have you been doing the plan for 3 months? That'll affect it. And naturally, strength, hypertrophy, aka growing muscle, power, all those things affect volume. Now, by and large, I would say don't do many more than about 5 or 6 sets per muscle group you're trying to work. Have a primary muscle group you're trying to work that you're going to hit those 4 to 6 sets. And then your secondary muscle groups are just that, they're secondary, and you're doing maybe 3 or 4 sets for them. If you're trying to cram 12 sets on one muscle group, by the end of it, the quality of work you're doing is just not there. Think about it. If you're trying to really squeeze loads of work out of your chest, we've been using chest so far. If you're trying to get loads of work out of your chest on set number 12, if you can get any work out, you didn't do the previous 11 hard enough. It also, I suppose, is a question of intensity. Are you actually working out hard? Because if you're there just pissing around, I suppose you could do 12, but then you're just pissing around. So why are you there in the first place? So top tip, don't piss around. Pick up some heavy weights, do your damn thing. So volume, important. How many sets you're going to be doing, assuming you're training properly and lifting hard, how many sets you're going to be doing for that session for each muscle group. And then the question that led me to do this episode in the first place, how much rest you should be having between sets. Like every single question you guys have, what is the answer? It depends. Naturally on a couple of bits. First, it depends on the exercise you're doing. An exercise that's more, let's say, intense on your central nervous system, you're potentially going to need a bit longer to rest. So, something that requires high levels of stability, something that requires a lot of muscle tissue to work together congruently at the same time, those are probably the two. For example, if you're doing some heavy walking lunges are massively unstable. So you're having to stabilize your core so you don't fall over. You're having to stabilize your steps so you don't fall over. You're having to stabilize the weight so it doesn't fall off you. Then you have to stabilize your joints. Then you have to control the movement. Then you have to step. There's a lot going on. And for everything to work, your brain is having to control the muscles in your abs, the muscles in your legs, the muscles in your calves, the muscles in your hands to hold the weights, assuming you're holding dumbbells, for example, the muscles in your shoulders, in your back, in your chest, in your glutes, in your hamstrings. If you're gurning whilst you're doing it, grimacing, in your face, in your feet. Hopefully you can see how much your brain is having to control all at the same time. If it's heavy, especially, the fatigue that sets in as well, it sets in very quickly. And anybody that's done heavy walking lunges knows this. And part of the reason why it sets in so quickly is because your brain is in fact controlling so much. It's very taxing on your cardiovascular system because there's so many muscles requiring so much oxygen all at the same time. So that's one. If you're doing something like that, or you're doing, say, for example, squat, but like a barbell back squat, where you can go heavy. It's the same thing. Your brain is having to control your abs, your back, your glutes, your quads, your hams, your calves, your shoulders, your everything, which requires oxygen, which requires stability, which requires all these fun and exciting things, which makes it a very taxing exercise. If you're doing something like that, you probably want to have a little bit more time. Depending how heavy you've gone, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, maybe even 3 minutes. If you're doing something a little bit more, let's say bog standard, you're sat on a chest press machine and you're just lifting. And even if you lift hard, perhaps 1.5 minutes is enough. If you're doing, say, some pump sets, aka you've done your main lift, you're now just on doing some isolation, maybe some bicep curls, maybe just 1 minute, 30 seconds even. So you don't need a huge amount of rest depending on what you're trying to do, aka if you're trying to build lactic acid, get the blood in the muscle, really build the metabolic fatigue, which I suppose you can think of as the lactic acid building, then less rest is better because you allow you to build more lactic acid in that muscle. If you need to have more rest because the exercise is more demanding from a cardiovascular point of view, from a neurological point of view, then perhaps allowing yourself 2 minutes plus might not be the worst idea. Like I say, it depends on what you're trying to achieve for that specific exercise. Not every exercise is the same. And even if you have, say, for example, the goal is to build some muscle, not every exercise you choose for that particular goal is going to have the same setup, because what you're trying to get out of the exercise is potentially different. Okay, some exercise you might set up for load. So you're trying to lift really heavy. Some exercises you might choose specifically because they are more unstable. So they're challenging that stability aspect of it. Some exercises you might choose because you're literally just trying to build a metabolic fatigue. Some exercises you might choose because they allow you to work slower, which means more time under tension. There's lots of variables and it's obviously not straightforward. Now, hopefully you guys have a good sense of me by now. I don't like to give blanket statements. I don't believe in them. But I try to give you guys as much information as I can so you have the broadest view of things you probably should consider when creating a workout for yourselves. So just to summarize at the end now, exercise selection based on your skill level. Pick something that you can do, you can stabilize, you can consciously contract the target muscle. And once you have the desired exercises you want to do, have just a vague idea of if you can't do them because the gym is busy or your gym doesn't have the right equipment, what you could substitute them with. Order of exercise is the next thing for you to remember. And although you could play with it and there's a bit of, like I say, a bit of play at the joints, as a rule of thumb, you want to start with your bigger exercises, compounds, heavy stuff at the top. You move down to the stuff that's more isolation-y, more single joint or single muscle tissue. Next, just have a consideration of how much work you want to be doing for each exercise and for each muscle group as you move through that workout. And then allow yourself the appropriate number, the appropriate amount of rest between sets. With a bit of luck, I've done a good enough job of explaining how to structure a workout session. If you're still confused, please let me know, because if you're confused, there'll be other people that are also confused, and I then could probably do with clarifying some of it. If you are confused, please DM me on Instagram at Bruno Dalladoni. It would be really helpful if you do in fact have any questions, to just let me know so I can answer you directly, as it were. As always, guys, if you liked the podcast, if you liked this episode, if you think anyone would benefit from it, please share. It helps the podcast grow. Just rate us 5 stars. Always, that is massively helpful. And if you're finding the podcast helpful, hopefully other people will too. So help them find the podcast by rating us. That's all my waffle done. Have a good week, and I'll catch you guys next time.